I know this video is going to be controversial. The main reason being I'm stepping on a lot of people's headcanon and theories that people are fairly attached to. And so when I say Niko is not going to be the final villain, I don't take this statement lightly. I know how much this means to a lot of people, but I think the evidence is more important than your expectations. And I think Sandrovich and Darrow have set the expectation for Niko to not be the final villain. And so I'll be presenting my case. And I think it's a fairly solid one. So hear me out when I make my 3 points on why Niko cannot be the final villain. The first reason is that Niko has lost before. The second reason is that Niko's time to be the antagonist has already passed. The third one is there are better options for the final villain. Now I'm going to go through these points in greater detail, and then I'll talk about possible rebuttals to my points and why they don't work. Now, let's start with the very first one. Niko having lost before. We know Niko has lost before because he lost to Oma's master before, way back in the flashback. He basically lost. He also admits this in his return in Kengan Omega, where he gloats about even though he lost, he managed to survive. Now, the problem with a villain that has basically a loss to his name is that it takes the oomph out of them being a force to be reckoned with, mainly because you know they've been beaten before. There's a reason why most of the antagonists don't have a losing record until they are defeated. For example, when Agito was the Fang of Metsuro and the king of the Kengan matches, he was undisputed. Kuroki himself, till this day, currently in the manga, is also undisputed. Lo Long, before he lost to Oma, was undisputed, and he was seen as the king of Purgatory with an undisputed record. You get the point, right? If you want your antagonist to actually be taken seriously as more of a threat, what you don't want to do is have him have a point of failure or someone that has overcome him before, because that takes some of that gas away. Suddenly, the protagonist is not doing something that has never been done before, he's doing something that has been done before by someone else. And that's why most of the time, when this is done, when an antagonist has a losing record, it usually doesn't end well for them. I don't even remember a single villain that has lost before and then lost to the protagonist and I technically still like them. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2. Niko's time has basically passed from being the antagonist or the villain. And this is actually the biggest, well, kind of the biggest reason. See, Niko could have been the main villain in Kengan Ashura. That's undeniable. And in fact, it would have been the most appropriate time to have him as the final antagonist, because there was a lot of mystery behind him, and the story had more focus around him with Oma wanting revenge. But that's not what happens in Ashura, unfortunately. And so, Niko loses his best opportunity to become the main antagonist of the series. But then it doesn't end there, because Niko had a second opportunity in the Kengan vs Purgatory tournament. We see Niko is right there. And keep in mind, Kiryu is also there, Agito is also there, Oma is also there, Faye Wang Fang was there as well. And so you had all of these characters in the perfect place, and you have basically a golden opportunity here. But even after Oma's fight against Lo Long, they don't go after Niko. They even straight up tell Niko when he was trying to go after him that no, don't do it. And you gotta ask yourself the question, okay, why? Why are you postponing? Why would Sandrovich and Darrow basically have Niko in the perfect place to be the final antagonist of an arc or a series, but somehow they don't feel like doing it? Instead, we have the climactic fight with Edward or the Westwood faction versus the Kure and Wu clan. But that just goes to show the point. We have basically missed 2 golden opportunities to have Niko as a final antagonist. And right now, currently in the story, there are simply bigger and badder people that just shine more even while Niko is there. For example, Shen Wulong. Which brings me to my third point, and that is that there are better picks. See, the combination of my point 1 and point 2 makes this pretty damning. But the fact that Lohan and Shen Wulong exist, I think is the nail in the coffin. Because they are far better as villains or antagonists than Niko could be. Because they don't have the same type of problems that Niko has. Hell, even Gilbert Wu has a better chance of being the final villain than Niko. That's how bad these two previous problems are that makes my third point stand out even more. Since now you have antagonistic forces that are simply better candidates to becoming the final villain or antagonist. And Wulong can become a villain. Sandrovich and Daro can flip the switch on us. I still think that's possible. And so those are my 3 points. Now, here are some possible rebuttals, and I can only think of 2, really. So let's say you accept everything I've just said. There is the first argument, and that is that Niko will manage to get stronger because of the Tiger's Vessel. I think this Tiger Vessel theory really only applies to Lohan, but I think the reason why people tie the Tiger's Vessel to Niko is so that Niko can somehow make a jump in power so that he could be relevant or maybe even usurp someone like Shen Wulong. That's the only reason I see people linking the Tiger's Vessel to Niko. That's the only reason. But unfortunately, we know the Tiger's Vessel isn't really meant for Niko. We know that. I've made the theory on the Tiger's Vessel theory before, right? I even have like a part 1 and part 2 of it. But putting all of that aside, not only did Shen confirm this by saying there was a second connector, but Faye does as well. Because when Faye takes a better look at Oma, he realizes that he looks like Lohan. And so, the Tiger's Vessel can't apply to Niko. It cannot. Because Faye had basically been interacting with Niko this entire time. It was only Lohan that he seemingly didn't take a good look at. And it is only when he thought of Lohan that he realized that he had been played. But this Tiger's Vessel theory has another problem. Why would Niko pick someone like Oma? It makes sense for Lohan. He's literally a direct copy of him. He's actually a better copy of Lohan. Essentially, Oma is. At least on paper. But why would Niko want Oma's body in specific? Especially when we know for a fact that Niko cannot transfer his own consciousness over to Oma. But let's say he could. Again, Faye is still a better candidate than Oma. He has a better body. He literally can use Fallen Demon and the Possessing Spirit at the same time. We even hear in his flashback how Faye was basically made to the person who that he is today, that is incredibly exceptional. On the other hand, we know Oma has heart problems. He can't even have the Possessing Spirit on for a prolonged period of time. He can't even have it at max. And so I think the Tiger's Vessel just can't really apply to Niko. Niko is just involved in the process, but as an extension of Lohan. But the second reason, and I think this might be the strongest one, it is that Niko is the most set up villain in the entire story. And so I think this would be appealing to the fact that, look, he was set up in Kengan Ashura, he was this big bad, and now I think in Kengan Omega he should be able to pay off as the big main antagonist of Omega. The problem is that we have another character who is probably way more foreshadowed than Niko himself, and that is, of course, the Connector. Technically speaking, Oma is the Connector's clone. And so from the moment he was introduced to the story, that was foreshadowing. From how Setsuna referred to Oma as a pseudo type of god. And how with Ryuki they also sort of referred to him as a sort of deity, to even Shen Wulong. I think that this could all be counted as foreshadowing. In fact, the Connector could be an even bigger villain because as far as we can tell, everything revolves around him somehow. The Wu clan revolve around him. The Worm revolve around him. Hell, even the Kengan Association has fought him before, or his lackeys before. Almost every character is connected to the Connector in some way. And so, I think he's not only bigger, but he's better. as the final antagonist. And by the connector, I mean either Lohan or Shen Wulong. And so, that's the video. If you made it this far, congratulations, especially if you are a part of the Niko becoming the main villain agenda. I'm sorry, I'm stepping all over your agenda. But I think it's important that I have this type of video out right now, because when the winds change from this, I think a lot of people will be disappointed. I think people will think it's a misuse of that character because it didn't live up to their own expectations. So yeah, that's the video. If you enjoyed the video, like, sub, all that fun stuff, and until next time, take it easy.